Let's uncover what's truly hidden between the lines of the most powerful psalm, Psalm 91. You likely know that Psalm 91 is God's prayer of protection, providing comfort and strength to countless believers throughout the generations. But there's something much deeper behind it. Have you ever wondered why Psalm 91 is so powerful? Why do even non-believers keep it open in their homes? This psalm isn't just a collection of verses, it's a covenant, a secret covenant between heaven and those who invoke it. This is where its protective power lies. Consider all the times you've been on the brink of despair when pain knocked at your door. Perhaps in those moments you searched for a sign, something to give you hope that things would change. Maybe you even opened your Bible and prayed Psalm 91, feeling a momentary relief. But what happens when the storms don't relent? What happens when, despite your faith, hardships continue to pound at your door? And here's the part few are willing to accept. Psalm 91 isn't a shield against difficulties. In fact, it's quite the opposite. This psalm invites you to step into the storm, to face it head-on, knowing you won't be alone. So what truly lies behind Psalm 91? Let's begin to unravel the meaning of its very first verse. Whoever dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty. At first glance, these words appear to promise safety. Yet they conceal a deeper significance. Imagine this: you're journeying through a scorching desert. The sun is relentless, each step more arduous than the last. There's no shade, no respite. Your body starts to weaken, the heat is overwhelming. Just when you think you can't go any further, you spot a shadow. Instinctively, you rush toward it. The shade offers only a momentary relief, but in that brief instant, it's enough. What once seemed unbearable now feels manageable. This is what the verse truly conveys. Dwelling in the shadow of the Almighty isn't a guarantee that you'll never face storms, that life will be easy, or that you won't have to cross your own deserts. It's something much deeper. The key lies in the word dwell. It's not about seeking temporary refuge or paying an occasional visit. It's a lifelong commitment. This verse isn't for those looking for an easy escape. It's for those willing to stay put even when things turn dark and difficult. To dwell in the shelter of the Most High means accepting that even though chaos rages outside, your soul will find rest under His shadow. But not everyone finds this place. Not because God hides it, but because to reach it, you must cross a threshold that few are willing to cross, the threshold of total surrender. To live under that shadow, you must let go of everything else. And that's where most stumble, because Psalm 91 is a covenant of protection that demands unwavering dedication. But there's something else hidden in this verse, something many overlook. The shadow of the Almighty isn't just protection, it's also a test that few pass. Dwelling under the shelter of the Most High isn't for the lukewarm or those seeking temporary comfort. It's for those willing to face their deepest fears, knowing that even when everything fails, that shadow will remain unshakable. Think about this. In the ancient East, shade was a symbol of life, a protection against the scorching sun, but it was also a place of intimacy and closeness. When you seek shelter under the shadow of the Almighty, you're stepping into a deeper relationship with Him, one where you cannot hide. You become exposed, vulnerable. It's in that place where your fears, your doubts, and your darkest secrets come to light. And just when you think that shadow will bring you relief, you realize it's also transforming you. For many, that transformation is terrifying. Because when you draw near to the Almighty, you cannot remain the same person. What truly lies behind the first verse isn't just a promise of safety, it's a challenge to stand firm under that shadow even when the world crumbles around you. A challenge to trust that, even if the storm doesn't subside, even if the desert remains relentless, God is still your refuge. Just as a shadow provides relief from unyielding heat and preserves life, the shadow of God offers rest and a security that the world cannot penetrate. Thus, Psalm 91 begins with an invitation to enter a place of divine safety, a call to live in a deep and constant relationship with the Creator, where we find our true refuge and strength. Let's continue with the second verse. I say to the Lord, you are my refuge, my fortress, the God in whom I trust. This verse seems simple, doesn't it? Saying that God is our refuge and strength and that we trust in Him. It sounds almost like an everyday prayer, something we utter without giving it much thought. But have you ever paused to really unpack what you're saying here? Because beneath these words lies a much deeper revelation, and like everything in Psalm 91, it comes with a price. First, consider the word refuge. We like the idea of a refuge, right? It's a place where we feel safe, where dangers can't reach us. It's that safe haven we run to when life gets tough. But here's the unexpected twist. Declaring that God is your refuge implies more than just seeking protection when danger strikes. It means recognizing that outside of that refuge, there's nothing secure. In fact, there's nowhere else to run. And this is where the conflict arises, because if you're truly honest with yourself, you'll realize that many times you trust more in the things you can control, your relationships, your job, your money. Those are your strengths, your refuges. So when you say, you are my refuge, do you really mean it? Have you truly let go of everything else? Because the truth is, this verse isn't just a declaration of faith. It's a confrontation with your own fears. It's an invitation to release everything you believe gives you security and to trust completely in something you can't see, something you can't control. Now let's turn to the word strength. A refuge is where you hide, but a fortress is where you prepare for battle. When you declare that God is your fortress, you're saying He won't just protect you, He'll empower you to face any battle that comes your way. But what if the battle isn't what you expected? Think about how many times you've felt paralyzed by fear. Not physical fear, but that fear that slips into your mind on the darkest nights, telling you that you're not good enough, that you won't make it, that you're all alone. That's the real battle. And when you proclaim that God is your fortress, you're saying that He alone can give you the strength to rise up and fight against those inner demons, those shadows whispering in your ear that you're not enough. That strength doesn't come without pain, doesn't come without struggle. When you say, you are my fortress, you're not asking for a life free of problems. You're asking for the ability to resist, to endure, to keep moving forward even when everything seems against you. You're recognizing that the struggle won't disappear, and more so, that you'll need to fight every day because trusting in God isn't a passive act. It's an active war against everything that tries to separate you from Him, and above all, against everything within yourself that tries to disconnect you from that faith. And then we reach the key point, the God in whom I trust. This is the climax of the verse. Trust. Easy to say, hard to live, because at its core, trusting in God means one thing, letting go of control. And if we're truly honest, that's the hardest part, isn't it? How many times have you said you trust in God, but deep down you were crafting your own escape plan, your own plan B? Saying you trust in God means accepting that you're no longer holding the reins, that your solutions, your answers, aren't enough. And that's terrifying. Trust means that when everything seems to be going wrong, you keep believing that He has a plan. Trust is looking around and seeing the world crumbling, but knowing deep within that somehow you're in the right hands. And here's the real challenge, because trusting in God isn't just when everything is going well, it's when everything is going wrong. It's easy to say, "I trust in you," when things are under control. But can you keep trusting when you lose that control, when everything you know fades away, when you see no sign that things will get better? That's what's behind this verse. It's not just a beautiful statement. It's not a simple prayer. It's a challenge. It's a radical decision, because trusting in God isn't an easy way out. In fact, it's quite the opposite. It's saying, even though I don't understand it, even though I don't see it, even though I don't feel it, I keep believing in you. And in that moment, that's when you discover the true power of these words. Because when everything else fails, when all the shelters you've built come crashing down, when your personal strength just isn't enough, it's there, in that place of absolute vulnerability, that you realize God has been there all along. Your refuge, your strength, the only one you can truly rely on. True strength isn't about the absence of fear, but the ability to move forward despite it. And that's when these words come alive in a way you never imagined. Let's continue with the next verses. Surely He will save you from the fowler's snare and from the deadly pestilence. He will cover you with His feathers, and under His wings you will find refuge. His faithfulness will be your shield and rampart. Imagine for a moment that you're walking through a dense, dark forest, a place where danger lurks in every shadow. The air carries the invisible whispers of deadly plagues, illnesses that can tear life apart as stealthily as night slips over day. In this setting, the promise of the Scripture resonates with overwhelming power. There is one who can deliver you from these imminent dangers, both seen and unseen. But not all the traps you face are out there in the world. Some lie within your own mind. After all, what is the hunter? The hunter isn't always someone pursuing you with ill intent. Sometimes it's that inner voice that ensnares you in nets of doubt, fear, and despair. The traps the verse speaks of aren't just external situations. They're also those invisible snares the enemy sets within your heart. They are the dark thoughts that imprison you in anguish, that make you feel there's no escape, that you're not strong enough, or that you'll never succeed. But the worst trap isn't something you can see with your eyes. It's not a tangible enemy. It's the despair that silently grows when you believe you're alone, when you think everything is lost. The true hunter doesn't always come wielding a weapon. Sometimes he arrives disguised as thoughts that seem logical, reasonable, even inevitable. He makes you believe there's no way out, that things will never change. How many times have you fallen into that trap? How many times have you been on the verge of giving up because you thought there was no other path? But here's the answer for those who truly want to hear it. He will cover you with His feathers. Who would have imagined that God's protection would be described as something so soft, so delicate? Feathers, wings. But don't be deceived by the softness of the image, for these feathers aren't fragile. They're a refuge stronger than any stone wall. Under those wings, you realize that strength doesn't always come in the form you expect. It's not always an impenetrable fortress of steel. Sometimes true strength is found in something as simple as allowing yourself to be vulnerable under God's care. And just when you think that shelter beneath God's wings is merely an image of peace and safety, the psalm strikes you with something more. His truth shall be your shield and buckler. This isn't just an invitation to hide. It's an invitation to fight. Because what is truth? Truth is more than comforting words or soothing ideas. It's a sword, a shield, something that protects you from lies, both those that come from outside and those you tell yourself. But what happens when the truth you need to protect yourself is also the hardest truth to accept? The truth about who you are, about your fears, about the things you've been avoiding. Because for many, the most dangerous traps aren't the ones you see at first glance. They're the ones you carry inside, the deceptions you've built around yourself to avoid facing what really hurts. And that's the most dangerous snare of all, the hunter's trap of denial. Denying yourself the truth, refusing to face what you need to change. The shield of truth doesn't just protect you from external attacks, it also confronts you. Because once you cloak yourself in that truth, you can't keep hiding anymore. And here's the key. When you take refuge under God's wings, you're not just seeking shelter, you're also embracing His truth as your shield, which means you can't continue living in lies and illusions. This verse, which at first seems like a promise of safety, actually leads you to a deep confrontation with yourself. Because to dwell under God's wings, to be truly free from the hunter's traps, you must face the truth. And that's not always comfortable. It's not always what you want to hear, but it's the only way to find true refuge. So then, just when you thought this verse was only about protection, you realize it's also about transformation. Because under God's wings, you not only find safety, you discover a truth that changes you from within. A truth that calls you to be brave, that asks you to look the hunter in the eye and tell him he no longer has power over you. Let's continue with the next verses. You will not fear the terror of night, nor the arrow that flies by day, nor the pestilence that stalks in the darkness, nor the plague that destroys at midday. This is one of those verses that, when you read it, might seem like a promise of total immunity, a guarantee that nothing bad will happen to you. But if you pause for a moment, you know that life isn't so simple. Fear, arrows, and plagues don't just magically disappear because you've read a psalm. So what does it really mean? What's behind these words? The verse begins by saying, "You will not fear the terror of the night." And this raises the first question, what is that terror? Because darkness is where all that is hidden takes shape, where the deepest worries you've tried to ignore during the day come alive. The terror of the night isn't just the fear of physical danger, it's the fear of the unknown, of an uncertain future, of those shadows in your mind that only grow larger when the lights go out. Who hasn't felt that knot in the pit of their stomach upon waking in the darkness of night, when the thoughts you try to avoid during the day become uncontrollable? But the most astonishing thing is that this verse doesn't tell you the terror of the night will vanish. It doesn't say the shadows will dissipate or the questions will disappear. What it declares is that you shall not fear. Because fear is what truly paralyzes you, traps you, leaves you vulnerable. And just when you wonder how it's possible not to be afraid, the verse takes you to the next twist. Nor the arrow that flies by day. During the day, when everything seems under control, when the light reveals what's real, that's when the arrows appear. And they're not just physical arrows, they're words, those subtle attacks that wound you when you least expect it. Because how many times in the clarity of daylight have you felt exposed, hurt by a word, a glance, an unexpected act? These are the arrows that fly by day. You don't always see them coming, but when they arrive, they pierce you deeply. But once again, the verse doesn't say there won't be arrows. It says, you will not fear. And here's the key. It doesn't promise a life without danger, without attacks, without pain. What it promises is something even deeper, that you won't live imprisoned by fear. Because when you free yourself from fear, the arrows lose their power, the attacks lose their impact. And that's what this verse is truly offering. Freedom from fear, not from circumstances. But how is it possible not to fear in the face of such real threats? Here's the unexpected answer: trust. Not in your own strength, not in your ability to avoid danger, but in something greater, something that doesn't shift with life's storms. It's about having the confidence that even when you can't control what's happening outside, you can control what's happening within you. And when you grasp this, something shifts. You realize that the real battle isn't about dodging arrows or hiding from the plague. The true fight is conquering the fear that paralyzes you. And that's where you find the freedom this verse promises you. Because yes, the night will still be dark. The arrows will keep flying. The plagues will continue to lurk. But you will have changed. And then, not only will you live without fear, but you'll be invincible against what once made you tremble. Let's continue with the 7th and 8th verses. 1,000 may fall at your side, 10,000 at your right hand, but it will not come near you. You will only observe with your eyes and see the punishment of the wicked. This verse seems to promise absolute immunity, a divine protection that shields you while everything around you collapses. But if you stop to think, there's something deeper and more profound behind these words, because it's not just a promise of protection, but a challenge to how you interpret chaos and justice. Imagine the scene. You're on the battlefield of life. To your left, 1,000 fall. To your right, 10,000 more. Chaos, fear, and destruction completely surround you. The immediate question arises: how is it possible that amid all this chaos you remain standing? What keeps you firm when everything else is collapsing? It's not because you're immune to pain or disconnected from suffering. It's because you've found a peace that transcends the chaos. You've discovered that your refuge isn't in circumstances or in everything around you going right. It's rooted in something much deeper, and it's that inner peace, that strength beyond what you can see or understand, that keeps you steady when everyone else falls. And here's the most puzzling part: you need only open your eyes wide. This phrase seems like an invitation to calmly observe, to watch the wicked receive their due. But what does it really mean to open your eyes wide? Opening your eyes wide goes far beyond witnessing the downfall of the wicked. It's about seeing clearly, perceiving what's happening on a deeper level. Because in that moment of chaos, when everything seems to be collapsing, it's easy to get caught up in fear, despair, the thirst for revenge, or the satisfaction of seeing others pay for their mistakes. But what this verse is truly asking is for you to look beyond, to open your eyes and perceive that even in the midst of destruction, something greater is happening. A divine justice that surpasses your understanding, an order that's being restored, even if at first glance it appears chaotic. And here's the most remarkable thing: when you open your eyes, you not only see God's judgment upon others, you also begin to see yourself in a new light. You start to realize that the protection surrounding you isn't something you can earn or control. It's a gift. A divine refuge that doesn't depend on what you do, but on who you are in Him. Let's look at the following verses. If you say, "The Lord is my refuge," and you make the Most High your dwelling, no harm will overtake you. No disaster will come near your tent. This is one of those passages many read seeking an almost magical security, as if by making God your refuge, suddenly all evil would disappear, as if calamity would vanish before it reaches your door. But if life has taught us anything, it's that problems, challenges, and crises don't honor easy promises. So, what's really behind these verses? Imagine this scenario. You've taken refuge in a safe haven, a space where you believe nothing can touch you. But outside, the storm continues to rage. The wind pounds with uncontrollable fury. Calamities seem to multiply, and yet you remain inside, trusting. This is where many get confused, thinking that being under God's protection means everything around you will be perfect, that you'll be completely insulated from the chaos the world brings. But that's not the true meaning. The verse says that no evil will overtake you and no calamity will come near your home. But what happens when evil does seem to approach? What happens when calamity reaches your doorstep? This is where true understanding comes in. Because what this verse is really telling you isn't that you'll be exempt from the storm, but that in the midst of it, your soul will remain steadfast. Calamity may surround you. It may knock at your door, but there's something it cannot touch: your inner peace, your connection with the divine. Think about the times you've faced moments of crisis, those situations where it feels like everything around you is crumbling. Maybe illness struck your family, or perhaps loss touched your life in a way you never expected. In those moments, it's natural to feel that God has failed, that His promise of protection hasn't been fulfilled. But here's the most impactful truth. The true refuge isn't physical. It's not something you can see with your eyes. It's a refuge built within you. It's that inexplicable peace that sustains you when evil lurks from every angle. So when the verse says that no evil shall befall you, it's not talking about a life without difficulties. It's speaking of an inner strength that allows you to walk through fire without being consumed, that lets you traverse the valley of the shadow of death without your spirit breaking. Evil cannot touch what you've entrusted to God. And here's the mystery. Your refuge isn't the absence of problems. Your refuge is God Himself. And what God offers isn't the elimination of storms, but His companionship in the midst of them. But the verse continues saying, "No calamity will come near your home." This phrase can be unsettling if taken literally, because we've all seen calamities reach places where we thought God was present. But the true meaning here is deeper. The home the verse mentions isn't just a physical house. It's the place where your faith resides, the center of your being, that space in your soul where you dwell with God. And here's the key. Disaster can destroy the material, but it can't touch the eternal. Your home, the true home, is that place in your heart where you've chosen to make God your refuge. And as long as God is your dwelling place, no calamity can destroy what truly matters. This brings us to a crucial point. It's not that problems vanish when you make God your refuge. It's that their power over you fades away. Evil loses its ability to control you. Calamities can touch what's external, but not what's eternal. And that's where the true power of this verse lies. It's not a promise that you won't suffer. It's a promise that suffering won't define you, won't break you. This is the hidden secret we often don't want to see, because it's easier to believe that God's protection means nothing bad will happen. But reality is much more challenging and at the same time much more beautiful. What God offers you is the ability to walk through chaos without letting the chaos enter you. He offers you a peace that doesn't depend on circumstances. A peace that survives the storm, that blossoms amid destruction, and that sustains you when everything else seems to be falling apart. When you make the Lord your refuge, you're relinquishing control, giving up the illusion that you can prevent calamities from coming. What you're doing is trusting that even when they arrive, they won't have the final word. And here's the most remarkable thing: calamity may come, but it cannot stay, because your home, your true home, is protected by something that transcends what the world can touch. Your soul, your faith, your connection with God, that's what's truly under His protection. So, what's really behind these verses? It's not a promise that you'll never face challenges. It's a promise that when you do, you'll confront them from a place of unshakable security. It's an invitation to live above fear, beyond circumstances. Because as long as your refuge is in God, no matter how fierce the storm, no matter how many calamities threaten to destroy what you love, you will stand firm. And that is the true victory this passage promises you. Let's continue with the next verses. For He will command His angels concerning you, to guard you in all your ways. They will lift you up in their hands, so that you will not strike your foot against a stone. Here, Psalm 91 reaches a fascinating and profound depth. The promise that God Himself sends His angels to watch over you, to lift you up when you fall, is a powerful image. But, as always, the hidden meaning is much more than the simple idea of divine protection. First, let's think about angels. It's easy to imagine celestial, invisible, and mighty beings guarding your every step. But the angels God sends aren't just passive guardians. They're not merely there to keep you from falling or to shield you from the dangers you anticipate. They're there to lift you up when you stumble, when your strength is gone, when the road ahead seems impossible. So what does this really mean? It means God knows you'll stumble. He knows there will be moments when you feel weak, when your foot slips, when you lose your emotional or spiritual balance. Because how many times have you felt like you're falling apart, that you can't go on? It's in those moments of weakness, of utter vulnerability, that this verse comes alive. God doesn't promise you won't stumble. He promises He will lift you up. And the most amazing thing is how He does it, through His angels. But don't think of angels only as distant, ethereal beings from the heavens. Often, those angels come in the most unexpected ways. A friend who calls just when you need it most. An encouraging word from someone you didn't even realize was looking out for you. Divine help doesn't always come with wings and radiant light. Sometimes angels are those people or signs that God places in your life at the most critical moments, when you're on the brink of falling. This is where the scripture delves deeper. It doesn't say on some of your paths. It doesn't say only when you're on the right track or when everything is going well. It says in all your ways. Even on the paths you choose mistakenly, even when you get lost or stray, the angels are still there. God doesn't abandon you when you take the wrong path. He keeps sending His angels, keeps lifting you up, keeps ensuring that you don't stumble to the point where you can't rise again. Imagine you're walking along a path and suddenly you find yourself in unfamiliar territory, unstable ground, full of stones you hadn't seen. You slip, you fall. But just before you hit the ground, something holds you up, something lifts you. That's what this verse is showing you. In moments when everything seems out of your control. When the path is harder than you thought, the angels are lifting you. Not to prevent you from falling, but so that when you do fall, you don't stay down. This isn't a promise that God will keep you from making mistakes or prevent the terrain from being difficult. It's a promise of closeness, of personal care. Because with his own hands implies a direct connection between the Creator and you. It's not something distant. It's not a cold or impersonal protection. God lifts you up with his hands, with a touch of tenderness and power that tells you you're not alone, even when you feel defeated. But perhaps more importantly, this verse carries a message that many don't want to accept. You will stumble. There's no way to walk through this life without encountering obstacles, without facing those moments when you feel you can't go on. Stumbling is inevitable. What this passage promises isn't the elimination of those falls, but that they won't be your end. Your setbacks won't be final. And what determines whether those moments of falling destroy you or not is whether you allow God, through his angels, to lift you up. And then, just when you think the message is only about protection and care, you realize that this verse is also an invitation to humility. Because for the angels to lift you up, you first have to recognize that you need help. You have to admit that you can't always walk alone, that you won't always be strong enough to avoid the stones along the path. You have to allow yourself to be lifted. And that, for many, is the hardest thing to accept. It's a promise that when you fall, when the ground becomes impossible, when you feel you can't go on, God will send his angels to lift you up. God doesn't ask you to be perfect. He doesn't ask you to never stumble. What is asked of you is that when you stumble, you have the humility to accept his help, to let his angels lift you up, to trust that even though the path is tough, you will never walk it alone. Let's proceed to the next verse. You will tread on the lion and the cobra. You will trample the great lion and the serpent. At first glance, this verse promises absolute victory, an invincible strength that will enable you to defeat the most ferocious beasts and the craftiest enemies. But when you begin to unravel what it truly means to crush the lion and the viper, you realize it's not as simple as a physical or literal triumph. Behind these words lies a much more personal battle, a struggle we all face but few acknowledge. First, there's the lion. The lion has always symbolized strength, ferocity, something or someone that challenges you head-on, that roars and intimidates you. We've all faced lions in our lives. They are those problems that attack you openly, that make you feel small and defenseless, that corner you and leave you without options. Perhaps it's an illness, perhaps a sudden personal or financial crisis that strikes like a deafening roar, threatening to destroy everything you've built. The lion doesn't hide. It comes straight at you. And the most terrifying part is that you see it coming, but sometimes you feel there's nothing you can do. However, this verse tells you that you'll crush it. It doesn't say the lion won't come. It doesn't say you won't confront that formidable force. What it says is that you will have the power to crush it, to defeat it. But how? Not with your own strength, not with your human abilities. God gives you the power to face it. He gives you the strength to crush it just when it seems about to devour you. And then there's the viper, far more stealthy, far more cunning. The viper doesn't attack head-on like the lion. It slips silently, hiding in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The viper represents those silent fears, those problems you don't see coming until it's too late. It's the doubt that creeps into your mind when you think everything is fine. It's the unexpected betrayal, the poison that subtly seeps into your life, almost imperceptible until you feel its devastating impact. But once again, the verse tells you that you will crush it. The power to conquer the viper isn't in avoiding it, because you can't avoid what you don't see. The power lies in recognizing it in time, in being so connected with the truth and with God's protection that even if the viper tries to poison you, it will have no power over you. Since the days of Adam and Eve, the serpent has always symbolized deception, temptation, silent manipulation. And what this verse promises is that you'll not only have the strength to defeat the obvious, but also the hidden, the treacherous, the things that try to undermine your faith without you even noticing. But here's the question: how can you crush something that seems more powerful than you? The lion is stronger, the viper more cunning, but it's not about your strength, it's about your authority. Crushing the lion and the viper isn't just about defeating external enemies, it's about exercising the authority God has given you. The power to overcome doesn't come from what you can do on your own, but from what God has placed within you. And the verse continues, "You will tread upon fierce beasts and serpents." This isn't a passive image. It's not that you'll simply survive these attacks or barely escape. To tread means to step with authority, to walk over something with confidence and total dominion. You're not just going to survive the lion and the serpent, you're going to walk over them. This changes everything. It's not merely a promise that you'll be delivered from your troubles. It's a promise that you'll emerge stronger. You're going to step over what tried to destroy you. What once made you tremble will now be under your feet. Let's move on to the next verses. "Because he loves me, says the Lord, I will rescue him. I will protect him, for he acknowledges my name." This verse is the moment when God himself speaks, when the divine voice breaks through and offers a promise that seems unshakable. But what does it really mean to be rescued? What does it imply to cling to God and acknowledge his name? At first glance, it sounds like a guarantee of protection, that if you trust in him, everything will be all right. But when you start to delve deeper into these words, you realize the meaning is much more profound and, at the same time, much more challenging. Let's begin with, "I will rescue him because he clings to me." Here, God is promising deliverance. But there's something few recognize. For God to rescue you, you must first be in a situation from which you need to be rescued. This implies that trials, difficulties, and crises are not just possible, they're inevitable. This verse isn't telling you that you won't face moments of anguish. In fact, it's hinting that pain, suffering, and hardships are part of the process. But here's the first surprise. The promise isn't that you'll avoid those moments, but that God will deliver you from them. Not before, not at the beginning, but right in the midst of them. And this is where the question arises. What does it mean to take refuge in God? The image of taking refuge is far more powerful than it seems. It's not just a superficial act of trust. It's not simply asking for help in moments of desperation. Taking refuge in God means sheltering in him with all your being, with total surrender. It's an act of yielding, recognizing that even if everything around you is collapsing, even if you feel there's no way out, you've decided that your only hope is to seek shelter under his wings. Embracing God involves acknowledging that you're no longer in control, that you can't do it alone. And that's the hardest part. Because for many, taking refuge in God means letting go of that desperate desire to control the situation, to seek human solutions. And the verse goes even deeper. "I will protect him because he knows my name." This is where everything changes, because knowing God's name isn't just being aware of it. It's not simply repeating it in moments of crisis. Recognizing his name is something much more intimate. In biblical culture, a person's name represented their character, their essence. So when this verse says that God will protect you because you know his name, it's not talking about mere knowledge. It's speaking of a deep and personal relationship. Recognizing God's name means you know Him in the very depths of your being, that you understand who He is, not just in theory, but through lived experience. It means you've walked with Him in the darkness, witnessed His hand move when everything seemed lost, and experienced His faithfulness in ways words cannot describe. And here is where the true mystery of this verse is revealed. God's protection doesn't depend on your perfection, but on your relationship with Him. He doesn't shield you because you're flawless or because you do everything right. He protects you because you acknowledge who He is, because you've made Him your refuge amid the storms, because you've chosen to trust in Him even when everything else fails. I will protect him, for he acknowledges my name. This isn't just a promise of physical safety. This verse reaches far beyond earthly circumstances. Recognizing God's name means you've grasped something many don't see. God's true protection isn't from the things you fear in the outside world, but from the things that can destroy you from within. Fear, despair, doubt, emptiness. The true protection God offers is against these internal forces that try to break your spirit, that seek to steal your peace, faith, and hope. That's the essence of God's protection. It doesn't always mean you'll avoid pain, loss, or hardship. What it means is that when those things come, and they will, your soul will be secure, because you've recognized His name and decided to make Him your refuge. But this promise is conditional. It's not guaranteed for everyone. It's reserved for those who turn to God, for those who acknowledge His name. This implies you can't simply invoke His protection without first surrendering completely to Him. Let's continue unraveling the following verses. He will call on me, and I will answer him. I will be with him in trouble. I will deliver him and honor him. At first glance, this verse is a beautiful, almost comforting promise. But when you dive into its words, you discover something much deeper and more dramatic. Because what God is offering here isn't just an answer. It's not just deliverance. He's offering His presence in the darkest moments, in the hardest hours of life. And it's here that this verse takes an unexpected turn, a turn that forces you to face the most challenging realities of faith. He will call upon me, and I will answer him. This phrase seems straightforward. You cry out, God responds. But how many times have you cried out and the answer didn't come the way you expected? How many times have you prayed in the midst of desperation and all you felt was silence? It's easy to assume that when you call upon God, the answer will be immediate, visible, something tangible you can recognize. Yet, what this verse unveils is something more unsettling. God always responds, but not always in the way we anticipate. Imagine for a moment being at the bottom of the pit of despair when everything seems lost. In those moments, you cry out to God, pleading for a way out, begging for a miracle, something to lift you out of the darkness. But God's response isn't always to pull you out of the darkness right away. Sometimes His answer is simply to be with you in it. I will be with him in times of distress. This is the central point of the verse. He doesn't promise to shield you from anguish, nor to remove you from it the instant you cry out. What He promises is His presence. God isn't a distant observer. In the darkest moments, in those hours when you feel there's no hope left, He's there. And this is the hardest part to accept, because often what we desire most isn't just His presence, but an immediate solution. We want the anguish to end. We want the pain to disappear. But this verse tells you something deeper. The true response of God isn't to eliminate the pain, but to walk with you through it. And then comes the next part of the verse, a promise that seems almost contradictory. I will deliver him and honor him. How can you be delivered and at the same time walk through the darkest moments? Here's the key. God's deliverance isn't always immediate or physical. Sometimes true deliverance happens in the heart, in that moment when, amidst anguish, you discover a strength you didn't know you had, a peace that surpasses all understanding. What's most surprising is that many times the process of being delivered first involves walking through the fire. God doesn't always pull you out of the flames, but He promises that when you're in them, you won't be alone. And just when you think the worst is over, that deliverance is the end of the process, God adds something more. He will honor you. Most of us think of honor as recognition, success, and rewards. But in the context of this verse, honor isn't just what the world values. The honor God promises here is much deeper. It's the result of having walked through the fire and emerged stronger. It's the honor of having journeyed through anguish and found God in the darkest place. True honor is the transformation that occurs in the soul when you discover that in the moments of greatest pain, God was there, holding you. Honor isn't just for the future, it's for now. Even though we often think the reward of faith comes at the end of the journey, what this verse reveals is that honor is found within the very process. Every moment of anguish you endure, every time you cry out to God and find His presence, you're being filled with an invisible yet powerful honor. Now, let's look at the last verse of the psalm. With long life I will satisfy him and show him my salvation. This verse seems so clear, so definitive. A long life, enjoying salvation, who wouldn't want that? It appears to be a promise that encapsulates humanity's deepest longing, longevity and, ultimately, assured salvation. But there's something even more powerful, more surprising, hidden within these words. Because God's promise here isn't simply more time on earth. It's the promise of a full life, a life that, though marked by trials and difficulties, culminates in a joy and peace that the world cannot offer. When God says, I will satisfy him with a long life, it's not just about the number of years you live, it's about the quality of those years. This isn't an empty promise of longevity. It's not just about living longer. This is about a life overflowing, filled with purpose, meaning, and a fullness that transcends what the world measures as success or achievements. There are people who live many years, but never feel they've truly lived. But God's promise is different. He offers you a life that is filled not just with experiences, but with divine purpose. A life where every day counts, where even the difficult moments hold deeper meaning because they're connected to an eternal plan. Imagine living a life where each year, each day, isn't just time passing by, but an opportunity to experience more of God's grace and mercy. Many years of life don't mean an absence of problems. You know there will be difficulties because the psalm itself says, I will be with him in times of trouble. But what this verse reveals is that God will not only give you more years, but those years will be filled with his presence, filled with the certainty that even when storms come, your life is in his hands. But just when you think you've understood what many years of life means, the verse takes a turn. And I will let him enjoy my salvation. This is the climax, the point where everything makes sense. Because in the end, what good is a long life if it lacks salvation? This is where God reveals his deepest promise. True joy isn't in the number of years you live, but in knowing that your soul is secure. Salvation isn't merely something you'll receive at life's end. It's something you can experience right here and now. It's a way of living where, even in the midst of challenges, you can be assured that, come what may, your eternal destiny is secure. The joy of salvation is that timeless peace, a profound understanding that you're held in God's hands and nothing can separate you from Him. It's easy to believe that salvation simply marks the end of pain and struggles. Yet, the true joy of salvation lies in experiencing God right in the heart of those struggles. It's knowing that even though life won't always be easy, even when moments of loss, anguish, and uncertainty arise, your destiny is secure. This joy is something few comprehend because it's not about superficial happiness. It's not the kind of joy that surfaces only when everything is going well. It's a joy that springs from knowing that even when everything seems to be falling apart, your soul is safe. And it's not merely a promise for the end of life, it's a promise for the here and now. Salvation isn't something you wait for until your final breath. It's something you can embrace this very moment. It's the assurance that even when the world around you is engulfed in chaos, there's an indestructible peace within you. The joy of salvation is living each day with the knowledge that you've already been rescued, that you've already been redeemed. And here's the most powerful part. This joy doesn't depend on external circumstances. It doesn't hinge on whether life is easy or difficult. The joy of salvation is unshakable because it's not based on what the world gives you or takes away. It's grounded in what God has already done for you. You've already been saved. You've already been filled with His grace. And that joy is what empowers you to walk through life with unwavering confidence, knowing that in the end, no matter what happens, your life is in God's hands. If this message resonated with you, please consider giving it a like so it can reach others who, like you, may be seeking words of encouragement in moments of uncertainty. Share this video with your loved ones so they too can receive this blessing. May God protect you and yours.